Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, Governor Rauner holds a Facebook Live event to take questions from Illinoisans on the ongoing state budget negotiations, as well as his push for term limits and his agenda to improve Illinois' job climate. Then in about 30 minutes from now, Governor Rauner is joined by Secretary of State Jesse White and State Senator Kwame Raoul, among others, as he signs a bill that will provide a valid state ID card for those being released from prison, with the goal of an ID card helping them to find work. Following that, in about 1 hour from now, we sit down with Greg Goins, the superintendent of the West Frankfort School District, and discuss how students' cell phones can benefit their education, as well as how the rush of new technology is changing the classroom. And finally, in about 1 hour and 10 minutes from now, we attend a panel at the annual meeting of the Illinois Association of School Boards as State Senators Andy Manar and Dan McConchie and State Representative Will Davis discuss the ongoing push to reform the state's school funding formula. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Education has never been more challenging in Illinois than it is right now, with comprehensive education reform recently passed by lawmakers and our state's financing of education remaining under pressure. That's why the Illinois Principals Association acts to represent the needs of students and our members. We keep our principals up to date on changes in the law affecting education policy, and we advocate to keep our schools safe and to maintain a healthy environment conducive to learning. With all the changes happening in every field and with the ongoing financial problems facing Illinois, it's vital we all know about changes affecting our lives. That's why the Illinois Principals Association is proud to be a part of the Illinois Channel's advisory on education. Their coverage, whether that of key lawmakers discussing changes in education, an interview with the Illinois Budget Director on the state's finances, or the one-on-one interviews with those working in education, all help to keep citizens across the state connected to the real issues that impact the education of our children. I'm Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. I'm also proud to say I serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, Governor Rauner holds a Facebook Live event to take questions from Illinoisans on the ongoing state budget negotiations, as well as his push for term limits and his agenda to improve Illinois' job climate. This runs about 30 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for another Facebook Live. Look forward to visiting with you today, answering your questions. We let everybody know about this Facebook, so we've got a ton of questions that have come in beforehand, and I hope while you're watching here right now, send in your questions live so I can respond to them. Today we're going to talk about a lot of different topics. We're going to focus primarily on our budget, getting a balanced budget with reforms, and the status on our negotiations. You know, the bottom line is we've been trying to negotiate to get a balanced budget in Illinois for the last 18 months. It's ridiculous we haven't got it done. And here's a simple fact. You can't get a deal, you can't get an agreement unless both sides want an agreement. That's just the fact. You can't get an agreement unless both sides want an agreement. Speaker Madigan said a year ago that what he wanted to do was raise our income tax back up to at least 5% and go up from there. He's stopped talking about that, and now what he's pushing is just to do a stopgap, temporary, incomplete budget. And that's all he wants, with no reforms. And that would be a tragedy. That would be a failure. That will cause a crisis later and a bigger tax hike later, and it will force a tax hike without reforms down the road. That would be a huge mistake. We need a balanced budget now with reforms now. We need reforms to grow more jobs. We need reforms to bring down our property tax burden. They're the highest in America. We need reforms to properly fund our schools. We're the worst state for funding schools in America. And we need to change our government structure so it's more responsive to our citizens, by having term limits on elected officials. More jobs, lower property taxes, better schools, and term limits on elected officials. These are the reforms we need. And if Speaker Madigan refuses to negotiate in good faith on these reforms, as he has for the last 18 months, then I'm going to insist, no matter what, I'll insist that if we're going to do a stopgap, like the Speaker is pushing, that we have at least two good reforms. One, term limits, the other, property tax freeze. Simple, bipartisan, very popular, very doable. We can get that done. So with that, let me give you an update on the status of the discussions, and I'll go through some of the questions. As I think most of you know, we did a stopgap agreement last June to get us through the election because President Cullerton and Speaker Madigan said they didn't want to take any tough votes before the election. They wanted to wait until after. So we did that. We did a stopgap spending plan. It was temporary, didn't solve our problems, but it got us through the election. Immediately after the election, I said to the leaders, let's meet every day, and I'll do it here in Springfield, or we'll do it up in Chicago, whatever works. Let's meet every day to negotiate a balanced budget with reforms. The Speaker refused to tell us his schedule. He skipped the first meeting or two, and he won't even agree to meet every day, and he won't tell us his schedule so we can schedule around his priorities. It's unfortunate, but we've got to push forward and stay strong in the process. We need a balanced budget now, and we need reforms. Now let's go through some of the questions that you've got until we get into the specifics of the process. So Jim McGovern has sent in a question. He says, how is it that we don't have a budget and we're broke and can't pay most vendors, yet the state is still collecting revenue every day? Shouldn't the state have a ton of money that was brought in and not paid out? Well, Jim, it's a very good question, and the answer is yes. Tax revenue is coming in. Actually, we collect a lot of tax revenue, but we've been having deficit spending. We've been spending more than we bring in for decades. That's the reason we have the most debt of any state other than California. That's the reason we already have some of the highest taxes in America, and we've been deficit spending in a cycle of deficit spending, accounting gimmicks, borrowing, and then taxing. And that cycle, deficit spending, accounting gimmicks, borrowing, and taxing, that's been going on for decades. And it's the reason we don't have enough money to pay our bills. And we're the only state in America that I know of that just doesn't pay its bills. We either don't pay bills, we don't pay our pensions, or we do use accounting gimmicks to cover up the deficits. And you know, the simple fact is, our Constitution requires us to have balanced budgets, but we've ignored our constitutional requirement. We always have out of balance budgets, and it's crushing our taxpayers, it's crushing our job creators and forcing them to leave the state. It's the reason we need reforms. Even if we just paid out bills that are coming in today, we're at deficit because we've got so many unpaid bills that's so large that we've got red ink flowing every day. We've got to change the system, change the structure. Get more jobs and more economic growth to get more revenue so we can pay down our bills and have a balanced budget for the long term. We'll get there, Jim. It's taken too long, but we'll stay persistent and get it done. Now, another question. This is from Jim Godfrey. Jim asks, how is it that lawmakers get to be released for the holidays while we have no budget? Seems to me we should be working daily on just that. Jim Godfrey, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm here in Springfield working. I wish the General Assembly was in session meeting to negotiate a balanced budget. You know what is even more outrageous than the fact that they're not negotiating with us in good faith on a budget is last week some Democratic lawmakers supported by Speaker Madigan filed a lawsuit so that their pay, legislators' pay, would be treated as a priority and put at the top of the unpaid bill pile. So they get paid now even though we don't have a budget and we're having massive deficits, and they're not here negotiating a balanced budget. They still want to be paid first. This is wrong. This shows how broken the system is. Frankly, this shows why we need term limits so badly. But I've called on the Democratic lawmakers last week, drop the lawsuit. That is not the right thing to do. The people of Illinois should not be paying legislators' pay first when we don't have a balanced budget, when some of our human services agencies aren't getting paid. This is not the right thing. Drop the lawsuit. Let's get a balanced budget with reforms. Now, Jim, I'm requesting that we meet every day with the lawmakers, Speaker Madigan, President Cullerton. Right, I asked that we negotiate reforms. Speaker said, well, reforms are not, fine, but what we need to do is talk about the budget with appropriations and new tax revenue. I said, okay, let's talk about that in the next meeting. And then at the next meeting, they showed up and said, well, we're not ready to talk about the appropriations. We need more time. We need to wait. And now we're waiting. It's been almost a week since the Democrats said they needed to wait and they needed more time, and every day matters. My sense is they're delaying, they're stalling, they're using tactics to get into January, February, and create a crisis, meltdown of our human services and our important social service agencies, and then try to force a stopgap plan or a tax hike with no reforms. That would be a tragic failure and a mistake. They should be here negotiating a balanced budget with reforms. All right, so next question. I guess a bunch of folks have asked, because there's no one name. This one must have had a bunch. Several folks have asked about funding for higher education and where that stands. All right, this is a huge issue. I am a big advocate for all education. It's the most important thing we do with our tax dollars is fund education. It's the future for our young people of the state of Illinois. I personally have been for years a major donor over at the U of I and a big advocate for higher education quality. Our community colleges especially, and our four-year institutions of higher learning. Simple fact is we have not been funding our universities properly in Illinois for years, just like we haven't been funding our K-12 schools properly for years. We have some of the highest tuition for in-state students as well as out-of-state students of any state university system in the country. And many of our high school graduates don't stay in-state. They go out to places like Mizzou or the University of Iowa or other places where they get more value because we haven't been supporting our university system. We also have a very costly bureaucracy in our university system. The state puts a lot of mandates on our university system, so their procurement process is very expensive. It costs tens of millions of dollars of excess spending that could go into the classroom with the teachers and could go to scholarships for our low-income kids, but instead it goes into a bloated, wasteful procurement system. We should reform procurement. Same thing with our pension system. Our university system is in our very expensive, unaffordable pension system. If we got pension reform, we could save hundreds of millions of dollars over time for our universities, and they could put that into supporting tuition reductions, scholarships for low-income kids, and better pay for our teachers and our professors. We need to change our system so our universities are more affordable, and we properly support them from the state through balanced budgets with economic growth and reform. This is what we're fighting for every day, and if we stay persistent, we'll get it done. Our university is critically important, along with K-12 schools and early childhood education as well. Next question. I don't know if I'll pronounce this right. Mari Aria Bird asks, why are we bankrupt? I'm proud to be from this state, but I don't see a future here. I'm young, I plan on having a family someday, but I don't think it can happen here. Well, Mari, that's a sad statement and it's a sad question, but you know what? That sentiment that you express, I strongly, personally agree with, and it's the reason I ran for governor. You know, I was born in Illinois. I've raised our 6 kids here, Diane and I. We've built businesses here. This is home. We love Illinois. We love our home. And I decided to run for governor because I couldn't stand to see what was happening to us. You know, people have your frustration with the lack of a bright future. People in Illinois have been seeing this for decades. That's the reason that Illinois is the leading state in America for out-migration. People leaving here. Illinois and New Jersey are the 2 states where people leave the most from. It's because our people are frustrated. They don't see a good future for themselves. They're leaving to follow jobs. They're leaving to follow a lower cost of living and a better quality of life with lower taxes. They're going other places. This is what we've got to change. And this is the reason I ran for governor. And I'm a volunteer. I'm doing this because I love Illinois. I'm not taking any compensation. I don't want a pension. I don't need any benefits. What I want is a better future for your children, my children, all of our children, and our grandchildren so they can have a better future in Illinois. That's what we're fighting for every day. That's why our reforms are so important. We need more jobs, good paying jobs in Illinois. We need to bring down our property tax burden. It's crushing our families here. We need to invest more in our schools, especially our low income or our rural schools. They need more support. And we got to change the culture in our government so it's working for you and all the people of the state by getting term limits on elected officials. Nothing will change the culture in our government and make it more about public service faster than term limits. That's what we're fighting for every day. Next question. This is from Eric James Stewart. He says, how can we help you in your efforts? Well, Eric, thank you. That's a great question. Thank you for that. And the simple answer is spread the word to your friends, your neighbors, everybody you come in contact with. Go on and forward some of the links to our social media efforts. We've got to spread the word about the reforms that we're making. The more we spread the message, the more we can create pressure for change in the General Assembly to get good things done. We've got to get the word out. And you know, here's a simple fact. We've got to create pressure for Speaker Madigan to want to get an agreement. It's a simple fact. Can't get an agreement unless both sides want an agreement. And the Speaker's been clear. He wants to do a big tax hike, and until he's ready to force that, he wants stopgap spending that's temporary, that's incomplete, that doesn't really fix the problem, and continue this deficit spending that we've been having in Illinois for more than 30 years. We've got to change direction. And Eric, the key, and what you can do, and your friends, family, neighbors, spread the word. Social media, phone calls, in meetings you go to, call into your local radio station, write a letter to the editor of your local paper. Get the message out. We need reforms to change the direction of the state. We need truly balanced budgets, and we need reforms to grow jobs, lower property taxes, improve our schools and fund them properly, and get term limits on elected officials. If we stay strong and get the message out, we're going to get this done. The good news is many members in the Democratic caucus in the General Assembly know that what we're asking for is right, it's good, and it's bipartisan. We got to have them create pressure on Speaker Madigan to change. Even the Speaker's daughter, Attorney General Lisa Madigan, a leading Democrat, has said one of our most important reforms around workers' comp, she agrees with, and agrees with the fundamental nature of the change that we're recommending. These changes are bipartisan. We got to get them done. Next question. This comes from Donald Harrington. Donald Harrington asks, some of you are asking why, apparently it's more than Donald, but he's one of the main guys, asking why I won't present a budget plan. Okay, so the reality is I presented a balanced budget my first month in office in January of 2015. It was balanced, it had some cuts, and it did have pension reform in it, and we were going to require a small short-term bridge to implement the pension reform, but in the scheme of the challenges we're facing, it was very doable. My recommendation for a balanced budget was ignored by the General Assembly, and they went on in the spring of 2015 and passed a wildly out-of-balance budget by more than $5 billion budget that I had to veto because there was no way to pay for it. It wasn't even close to being balanced. And then this past January, again in my budget address, I recommended possibly one of two paths to a balanced budget. I said the first path to a balanced budget is that we work together through our working groups, get bipartisan agreement on cuts, potentially new revenues, and reforms, and we do that on a bipartisan basis, and the working groups produced that result last spring. Or, if we don't want to do that, give me the executive authority, General Assembly, grant me the authority to make the necessary cuts and expenses to balance the budget. The General Assembly, they've repeatedly said no. We won't give the executive authority to make the cuts, and we won't follow up on the working group recommendations on getting a balanced budget with reforms. So that's the reason we're stuck. And again, you can't get an agreement unless both sides want an agreement. We've got to ask the Speaker and President Cullerton, please commit to getting an agreement. Let's get bipartisan reforms, get good things done for the people of Illinois. Next question, Brian Shop, or Shopey. What is the incentive for the residents and businesses to stay in this state? That's the essential question, Brian. That's the reason I ran for governor, and that's what we're fighting for. Illinois is such a wonderful place. I love Illinois. This is home. This is a great place. We've got the best people, hardest working people in America. We've got the best location of any state in America. We've got the best agriculture of any state in America. We've got some of the best infrastructure, some of the best universities of any state in America. We should be thriving. We should be kicking tails. And instead, we have the highest property taxes in America. We have massive deficit spending and some of the highest debt of any state in America. We have the 5th highest property tax burden. And we're bleeding out jobs, especially manufacturing jobs, at a very high rate. And we've got massive cronyism and patronage and conflicts of interest in our state government. Our government, our state government, is failing the people of Illinois, and that's what we've got to change. If we change that very quickly, we'll have residents who want to stay, we'll have residents who want to move from other states, who want to move to Illinois, and we'll have businesses who want to come. I've talked to dozens of businesses who would like to come to Illinois that I'm trying to recruit to come here, but they've said, Governor, show that long-term taxpayers have a voice in Illinois, show that you'll be financially responsible, that special interest groups won't keep forcing deficit spending, and show that you've got a regulatory burden that will allow businesses and job creators to compete. And you say, the job creators have said, Governor, if you can show that, we'll come. We'd love to come to Illinois and hire the great people there and build businesses in your great state. We want to come, but you've got to show change in direction because you've been going down a road that's very hostile to job creators for a long time. That's what we're fighting for, and together we can get it done. Some more questions have come in here while we're speaking. Here, Alexander Lavaney, looks like, from Chicago, asks, is there anything you plan to do at the state level to intervene and or stop our real estate taxes from becoming more burdensome? Well, Alexander, it's a great question. Our property taxes in Illinois are the highest in America. Us, we're basically tied with New Jersey for the highest taxes, and also tied for the most out-migration of people leaving, not a coincidence. And our reforms are about bringing down our property taxes. What do we need to do to get it done? We need to put on a property tax freeze, meaning local governments, local districts can't raise property taxes unless they get a voter referendum approving the tax hike. That will change and give you and the residents of Illinois more voice, more power in controlling the pace of property tax increases. That's one important step. The other thing we've got to do is reduce the unfunded mandates, the rules, the regulations, the restrictions being put on local governments and local schools from the state. We've got unbelievable red tape and restrictions and mandates forcing high spending with no way to pay for it. And what we should do is get Springfield out of the local government's management, let each community decide for itself how it wants to handle its cost structure and run its government its own way. If we do that, each local government and each school district can run its own system, its own way, with the local resident support and bring down the costs over time. That's the key. Local control of the costs of government and getting rid of the unfunded mandates and the layers of government bureaucracy that Springfield forces on our local communities will bring down our property taxes, bring down the cost of living for our working families, and bring down the cost of locating here for job creators that build the good paying jobs that we need more of in the state of Illinois. Another question from Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan Opadora, looks like. Let's see. Why don't you want a stopgap budget? Well, Matt, that's a good question. So we reluctantly agreed to a stopgap budget last June as a way to get through the election at the request of President Cullerton and Speaker Madigan. Matt, the reason stopgap budgets really aren't good is that they're incomplete, they're temporary, and they have spending going on that has no way to pay for it. And all that will do is eventually, it cause a crisis. Basically, stopgap budgets kick the can, and it will cause a crisis later, and it will result in an even bigger tax hike down the road. We should face reality, get a balanced budget right now, the sooner the better, and get reforms to grow the economy and create more good-paying jobs. And a stopgap budget doesn't do that. It doesn't get any reforms. It doesn't fix the problem. A stopgap is a kick-the-can strategy. We've been kicking the can in Illinois, not paying our pensions, not paying our bills for decades, and it's created the mess that we're in. And the simple fact is, we'll never have balanced budgets unless our pace of economic growth is as fast or faster than our pace of government spending growth. And we've been flat economic growth on jobs for years. Meanwhile, our government spending has been on a rocket ship. That, by definition, always results in unbalanced budgets, deficit spending for the long term, and we've got to change that. And raising tax rates won't solve that problem. It just temporarily might balance a budget for a short period, like we've done occasionally over the last 40 years. But in the end, if economic growth is flat and government spending is going on a rocket ship, raising tax rates just never catch up, and you chase your tail down. That's why we need reforms along with a truly balanced budget. Let's see. Question from Andrew Mertzenich. Mertzenek. Sorry, Andrew, I'm not getting your pronunciation right for your last name. How you fund things without the property tax. Well, this is, Andrew, this is an important issue. Obviously, we need to have property taxes to fund our schools, to fund key local government, our police and fire and key agencies. Property taxes are an important part of a functioning government. But in Illinois, we have the highest property taxes in America. We have some of the worst unfunded mandates from our state government of anywhere in America. And we have more units of local government. We have more bureaus and districts and entities, townships, et cetera. Entities that many should exist, but some of them probably are not necessary. We have 2,000 more units of government than the next state after us. Those 2,000 units add extra cost and extra layers of bureaucracy. We could shrink that down and then put that money we save into our schools and into our human services. And that's what we're fighting for. Local control. Folks who want to keep all their levels of government should keep them. But those residents, those communities that would like to shrink the number of bureaucracies, the number of layers of government they have, they should be allowed to do that. Springfield should not be mandating, requiring that we have so many units of government. That's one of the biggest things we're fighting for. And if we change that, we can bring down our property tax burden without reducing the quality or amount of our government services, and we can free up the resources to put in our schools. We can become more competitive to grow more jobs. That's the kind of reform we really need. Another question from Michael Shuck. Michael asks, what's your plan for small business? All right, Michael, it's a great question. You know, small businesses are the backbone of Illinois' economy, the backbone of the American economy. 2/3 of all new jobs created are created by small businesses. Prior to my running for office and becoming a public servant to work for you directly, I was a venture capitalist for 32 years. I helped start and grow hundreds of small businesses. And many of them failed. Starting a small business is hard. But many, many succeeded on a massive scale. I was very proud of our success. And some of those companies were in Illinois, and there's all over the United States. And the money we invested in the small businesses were teachers' pension money. I was proud to work for teachers in Illinois and across America for 32 years, building businesses, having the business success make money for teachers so they could have a better retirement and we could save taxpayer money. Very proud of that track record. Now here as governor, core part of our plan, core part of what we're fighting for in reforms is to make Illinois more attractive, more competitive for small businesses. We've got to grow and help small businesses and enhance their competitiveness. To do that, we need to reduce the regulatory burden on our businesses, reduce the red tape, cut the red tape, bring down the property tax burden, and free up our small businesses to compete and thrive. One of the biggest changes we need to make to help small business is our workers' comp costs, the insurance to help injured workers. We need to protect our injured workers, make sure they get good health care, but we got to make sure there's not fraud, there's not abuse, there's not claims for work injuries that really didn't happen in work. They happened outside of the workplace. That's not fair to the hardworking employees, and that's not fair to the small businesses and the job creators. Even Democratic leader, Attorney General Lisa Madigan has said she agrees that we need causation. We need to change workers' comp and have causation in it to have it be affordable and competitive to grow jobs in Illinois. That's one of the many things we're fighting for to help small businesses grow here. Let's see. Boy, a lot of questions coming in. This is good. Ross Edwards asks, with a property tax freeze, where does education money come from? Okay, great question, Ross. Short answer, money for more spending in education can come from two places. One, more money from the state, because the state of Illinois is the worst state government in America for contributing the fair share to schools. We want to increase state support from schools. The second place is going to come from is by cutting the bureaucracy, the layers of government, the wasteful spending inside government, and the savings that come from that can go into our schools. That's the two sources. Cut the bureaucracy and wasteful spending and increase state support. That way we can afford to freeze our property taxes and reduce the property tax burden over time and still put more money in our schools, which is where the top priority for taxpayer money should go. Great question, Ross. Brian Eckstein asks, how will you draw in more residents to the state? Well, that's the core of everything we're fighting for. We need to attract more residents, more hardworking families, more job creators to the state of Illinois. To do that, we need to reduce the regulatory burden and the red tape. We need to bring down our property tax burden. We need to reduce the bureaucracy and put the money in our schools so we have the best education system in America. And we need a responsive government system that works for the people by getting term limits on elected officials. Term limits are a great way to make government more responsive, get people in government who are there for the right reasons, not for a pension, not for big pay, not to get entrenched with special interest money, but just there to be public servants, make good decisions for the people of Illinois, and then leave office. If we change that, more people will come, we'll bring more residents, we'll bring more jobs and job creators, and Illinois will have a very bright future. Mike Zenz, looks like, Mike Zenz asks, when do term limits go into effect? Mike, that's a great question. So what we're recommending in our bill for term limits is that all statewide elected officials could stay in any one office at the most 8 years, no longer than 8 years. And I've said, I've committed, I will not stay in as governor more than 8 years. 2 terms, that's a long time. That's just what George Washington did when he founded America. Term limits on the governor, the lieutenant governor, attorney general, treasurer, comptroller should be 8 years. For the General Assembly, we've recommended that 10 years be the limit. That's a long time. That's plenty of time to be a member of the General Assembly, to be a lawmaker. And for those public officials who would like to stay in elected office, you can always run for another office. But the key is don't stay entrenched in any one office too long. If we can have the General Assembly pass term limits through the General Assembly and put it on the ballot so it can be a voter referendum, so you can decide, you can vote it up or down in the 2018 election, then the clock will start ticking and we'll have 10 years for General Assembly members starting in 2018. 2018 is the next time that we can get term limits on the ballot in a statewide general election, so you can vote up or down term limits. That's why we're fighting so hard. You should be able to decide. If you don't want term limits, you can vote no, but you should have a voice. And if you want term limits, you should be able to vote yes to get it done one way or another. Okay? And no more questions? Are we done? Okay. Well, we still got a bunch of questions flying in, but I'm told we're running out of time. Appreciate the visit with you today. Thank you so much for all the great questions. We'll try to respond to some of them too, just online, and so we can keep the dialogue going. Thank you for your concern for the future of our state. It's an honor, privilege for me and my wife Diana to work for you. We look forward to visiting with you again and doing more Facebook Live updates. Again, help us spread the word. We need a balanced budget with reforms, and let's put the pressure there. Let's make sure that everybody in the General Assembly wants to get an agreement. Can't get an agreement unless both sides want to agree. Let's agree to get reforms. Let's get a balanced budget, and we'll have a better future for our children and our grandchildren. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Next, from Chicago, Governor Rauner is joined by Secretary of State Jesse White and State Senator Kwame Raoul, among others, as he signs a bill that will provide a valid state ID card for those being released from prison, with the goal of an ID card helping them to find work. This runs about 30 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Nellie Vasquez-Roland. I'm the co-founder and president of A Safe Haven Foundation, and we're extremely honored to be the host site for what promises to be one of the most historical bill signing events that's happened in the state of Illinois. As many of you know, our work here at A Safe Haven really evolves around helping the homeless, and about a third of the 5,000 people that we served last year actually were suffering from the fact that they didn't have a state ID, and we recycled in and out of the system because of that. So we are incredibly excited. We can't even imagine what it means to the people that are going to be benefiting from this new bill, but I can tell you from our perspective, it means the world to us in terms of the amount of time that we're going to save in helping people coming out of the system hit the ground running the moment they come out and being able to plug them into the services that they need right away. So we cannot thank everyone on this team enough for the hard work that they did to make this day happen. And I want to just let you know that we are also extremely excited to have the Secretary of State, Jesse Brown, with us today. I'm sorry, Jesse, what did I say?
Jesse White.
I didn't say Jesse White?
Some color.
Oh, Jesse Brown. I'm thinking of the VA. I'm sorry, Jesse White. Jesse White. As you know, I was thinking veteran. Oh, I apologize for that. Jesse White, with us today, who is an incredible veteran and advocate for the veterans that we serve here at A Safe Haven as well. So without further ado, Jesse White.
Thank you very much, Nellie. I just want you to know that I'm going to suspend your license from here. Well, it's an honor for me to be here. And by the way, Nellie, a few years ago, matter of fact, a year ago, we honored you at our event down at the Thompson Center. So we just want you to know that we deeply appreciate all that you've done over a long period of time to help society to be a better place for all of us to live. Special thanks to Governor Rauner and the members of the Illinois General Assembly for coming forward with this meaningful piece of legislation. And I'm honored to be here to participate in the bill signing ceremony. In my office, which is the largest Secretary of State office in the nation, where we have a little bit less than 4,000 employees, corporate finance, security, keep the CO, Court of Claims, the list goes on and on as to our functions. We are proud of the fact that we've been working for many, many years with the Department of Corrections to help bring about this wonderful piece of legislation, which is designed to help individuals to be able to transition back into society. It's important for them to have a document in their hand in order so they can rent an apartment, to apply for a job. And we travel to almost all of the penal institutions as we speak in preparation for those individuals who want to become a part of society. We have Ellen Myers, who is here, and Ellen is our director, and her mission is to make sure these individuals have all the documentation that they need in order to apply for a state ID. Here in Illinois, we have 9 million driver's licenses that we distribute. But we also have 3.4 million IDs that we give out. And we're just honored to be here today to take part in this wonderful ceremony where we're helping these individuals to become a part of society. They need an ID in order to get a job, and they'll probably need an ID in order to rent an apartment. We want to make sure that we have that document available to them. And again, I want to thank and applaud the efforts of the members of the Illinois General Assembly and to Governor Rauner and to those who've been involved with this effort. Thank you for a job well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Jesse White. Now I would like to take a moment to introduce you to 2 people that have been victims of not having an ID when they come out of the criminal justice system. One of them actually spoke as the governor was advocating and the senators were advocating for this bill to pass in terms of the importance and what it means to them in their lives, you know, getting back on track. And just for, you know, by means of example, I just want to tell you that Benita, who's one of the people that's going to come up and speak, is an example of someone that has been in and out and in and out of the system. As a matter of fact, she served 4 times in the prison system. And the way she came to A Safe Haven is she was referred through what we call a CSAT program through the Sheriff's Office, which has people, as we all know, the county system is one of the largest prison systems in the world and it's overcrowded. And most of the people that are in the county jail are people that are not technically convicted, but they've been arrested, right? So they sit in jail if they can't make bail. Benita was one of them. And with that program, what we've been working with the jail system is they've been sending people to A Safe Haven in lieu of having them sit in a jail. And what happens here is we're able to really assess the reason why they're in crisis and connect them to treatment, to job training, to education, whatever it is that they need. So when they do go back for that court date, which takes months sometimes, they're able to get in front of a judge with a report that indicates the number of hours of community service, the number of hours of job training, the GED, the treatment completion that they did. And the judges see the hard work that they put in when they're here that gives them a basis to really reducing or eliminating their sentences. So Benita is someone that came through that CSAT program, and I have seen firsthand how hard she works and how motivated she is to see the light at the end of the tunnel finally in a way that will land her a job. She's completed some job training programs here, and we can't wait for that day to happen. But she has courageously agreed to come up and share her story. So without further ado, Vanita.
Hello, everyone. It's very important to have a state ID. Like you said, you can't get a job. You can't even go to a food pantry now without your state ID. And being incarcerated in the state, they have all your information. They take your DNA, they do your fingerprints, so they have all the information right there for you to get your state ID. And I just want to thank the governor again for signing this bill because it's very important to have your state ID. You can't even walk around in this city of Chicago. Now, if you have a state ID, you're a vagrant. So it's important to get this bill passed and to get it done because if you have your state ID, you got your first step back in society doing the right thing. And that's all.
Thank you, Vanita. Now I want to introduce you all to Arias. He is also someone that has been in and out of the system. He's only 25 years old. So he represents a very large demographic of people that are in the same boat where once they get in trouble and they have something on their record and they end up in the prison system, they're going to come out and they're going to recidivate. Just so that you know, in the state of Illinois, the rate of recidivism is over 50% of people that come out of the prison system. The likelihood of them going back in is extremely high. And again, it all starts with when they come out, they have no passport to not even a food pantry. So another example. Thank you, Arias, for sharing your story. Come on up.
I first want to give a special thanks to the governor for passing the bill. I think it's an amazing opportunity, and also Safe Haven because they put me in a place to even speak about this. I agree with everything she said. It's extremely hard when you have no ID to even get on your feet. I mean, I remember a time when I was fresh out and I had no place to go, no support system at all, and I was walking around in the cold trying to figure out how I'm going to get my ID because I wanted a job so bad and I wanted to change my life around. And without the ID, without a birth certificate, without a social security card, I couldn't make any of it happen. With that, I ended up getting a runaround, running from place to place in the cold, and eventually I gave up on it for a while. I did end up getting my ID, but it was like the stress behind it was almost enough to 2 months later, added along with the stress from the parole and even just trying to get on your feet, it kind of sent me back to a violation and going back to IDOC. But with the bill, I do feel like it would be a great thing to come home with that without having to go through all that, because along with that is a lot of added stress, and you're already in a stressful enough situation trying to get on your feet, trying to get your life back together. So I again, give everybody a special thanks for passing that bill, and I think it's an amazing opportunity to be able to change a lot of people's lives and at least give them a start, a push. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon or good morning. I just have to give Nellie a pass because she's thinking about veterans, and so she's thinking Jesse Brown. So that's why she service veterans here. So I want to thank A Safe Haven, Nellie and Brian for always being on the front line in the community on the west side. It's so great to see their trucks and vans helping formerly incarcerated people throughout the city. So thank you very much, and for keeping Brian on his toes. So I have to say also the governor and Secretary White, we owe them a great deal of gratitude, because if it wasn't for the two of them, this bill will not become law today at all. It's because the governor has a vision to make sure that people that are incarcerated, when they return, that they have equal opportunities to a fair shot at being productive. So not only is this bill important to those that were incarcerated, but it's important to everyone. Everyone needs to have people around them that could be productive. So, Governor, I think that I want to thank you for making it happen, and thank you for signing the bill today. Bills like this is what keeps me running for office, because Mary Flowers, you've been down there 32 years, and this is something that you've been fighting for. But it takes some point when people finally get it. And it takes good leaders like the governor to help people get it. And so, Mary Flowers, I know this is long overdue for you, so I'm very happy that this day is here. And to me, this is real change that's going to affect the lives of many people. And a bill like this is really, Governor, shaking Springfield up and turning it around. And that's what we need in Illinois, bills just like this, because people on the west side, south side, and down in rural Illinois, they're going to feel the impact of this bill. And this bill is important. Even before I became elected, the community that I represent, there's a reverend named Reverend Crawford. And he was a formerly incarcerated individual, and he had an organization called Faith Inc. Incorporated. And he worked closely with Secretary White's office, helping people get their license when they got out, because it's been such a problem for years. Reverend Crawford right now is very, very sick, and he would have been here today, because this right here, not only is this what he lived for, but it caused him to go bankrupt because he kept up in a business that he couldn't afford. So right now, he's in a hospital. He still owes the landlord thousands of dollars because he believed that it was necessary for individuals to have driver's license when they were released from prison. And everyone should know about Reverend Crawford because he's rather ill. I'm happy to say that he will be proud of the governor and Jesse White for making this happen today. So, Governor, thank you very much, and I'm very proud to be a chief sponsor on this bill.
Well, good afternoon, and I always love to be welcomed by Representative Ford to the west side. As a South Sider, I'll be getting back to the South Side soon. It's been said that this is an important first step when you come out, and it's important that we look at this as a first step. It seems so fundamental that every citizen, and we're talking about returning citizens here, every citizen should have that easy access to getting an ID. And it's a wonder that we've struggled getting to this point. With the work that we have to do in the interest of public safety, in the interest of reducing recidivism, in the interest of welcoming back returning citizens, the fact that we've done this with a lot of strain concerns me a bit, because the governor has committed himself early on to creating the Commission on Criminal Justice Reform. I'm optimistic. We just voted a couple of weeks ago on last series of recommendations to the General Assembly, and we've got some exciting things to be considered by the General Assembly to make the transition for returning citizens a seamless one, to reduce the prison population, as the governor has set forth, by within the next 10 years by 25%. These are important goals to promoting public safety, to making sure that people who have paid their debt are honored as having paid their debt. The other important, I think, symbolism that is desperately needed in this state as we advance on these criminal justice reform matters is the symbolism of bipartisan work that is desperately needed. And I think we have more to come on that. We see it at the executive level with the my fraternity brother, Secretary of State Jesse White, and the governor here, and we see it at the legislative level. And I'm hopeful that our work on criminal justice reform will seep out into other policy areas. And so I want to thank the governor for his leadership on this.
Good afternoon. I'm State Senator Karen McConaughey, and I want to echo much of what Senator Raul just commented on. First and foremost, to thank the governor for forming the Criminal Justice Reform Commission, of which this was one of the recommendations. This is about, I want to say about the fourth or fifth bill that we've passed this year that was part of those recommendations. Secondly, I'm proud to be a member of that commission along with Senator Raul and Representative Drury and many others. And as Senator Raul indicated, there's a lot more to come. Just a couple weeks ago, we did recommend out of the commission some additional reforms that we believe will have a profound change on the opportunity for individuals who have done their time, they've served in our state penitentiaries, and now have an opportunity to get their feet back under them. And so, and this bill in particular, it's almost kind of hard to imagine that this wasn't already the case. You can't imagine that people were coming out of our state penitentiaries and not having any sort of identification in order to move on with their life. So this is, for those who've been advocating for this for a long time, to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, this has been a very bipartisan effort. I am grateful to all of them for working so hard to get this bill passed. It is long overdue, so I'm very excited to now introduce the gentleman who started this whole thing and is going to make it law in a matter of moments. Please join me in welcoming Governor Rauner.
Good things take a team effort. This has been a huge team effort. Democrats and Republicans coming together to work together to make good things happen for the people of Illinois. I want to thank members of the General Assembly here. Thank very much Secretary White. And thank everyone for coming together to make progress on very important issues. Today, and let me take something else. We're here today at Safe Haven. Safe Haven does extraordinary work. I hope you members of the media can get to know this organization a little bit better. They make a huge difference in the communities here, especially in Chicago, but around the state of Illinois, helping people who are vulnerable and at risk and at need get reestablished and lead productive lives. They do this heavily for veterans, many homeless veterans who deserve our support in every regard and need to lead productive lives and have a chance at the American dream, but for everyone, vulnerable, homeless. And homelessness isn't just about getting a roof overhead or a little warmth. It's about establishing life and life skills, education, job training, addiction, mental health, addressing the needs that cause homelessness. Safe Haven does an extraordinary work in this regard, and it's been an honor for me and my wife to be supporters of theirs for more than 20 years. Today is a good day for the people of Illinois because we are accomplishing two goals simultaneously that a lot of people think are incompatible. One, we're taking a step to keep the people of Illinois safer, reduce crime in our communities, and being a more just, more caring, more compassionate society by helping those who've made a mistake, after they pay their debt for their mistake, lead productive lives and have a second chance. We in Illinois, in America, we believe in redemption. We believe in second chances. Everybody makes a mistake. Some mistakes are more serious than others, but everybody makes mistakes. Everybody deserves a second chance. This bill helps those who've made a mistake get reestablished in their lives and make up for their mistake and lead productive lives, as well as by being productive citizens, they're less vulnerable to going back and making a mistake and committing criminal behavior. And therefore, we're keeping our communities safer. We're accomplishing both these goals simultaneously. As was said, it's extraordinary that we haven't had this law, this rule before, but never, better late than never. And there are many other reforms to come. I was honored to have Democrats and Republicans come together in the General Assembly. In my first month in office in January of 2015, I asked to form a commission on criminal justice and sentencing reform. And people came together, bipartisan basis. They've made 14 recommendations so far. A number of those have been passed into law, and this is one today. They're making another round of recommendations now, and it's all about keeping the people of Illinois safer and having a more just and fair criminal justice system. And here's the key. Corrections, criminal justice is not just about punishment. If we think that it's only about punishment, we will never keep the people of Illinois safe. We'll never ensure a better life for the people of Illinois. It's both about punishment and keeping dangerous criminals away from the general public, but it's also about rehabilitation and helping people lead better lives, productive lives, and also getting at the root cause of crime. Just punishing doesn't solve the problem if you don't get the root cause for what caused the criminal behavior in the first place. Often it's mental illness. Often it's addiction problems, many times which is related to mental illness. It's often self-treatment. Addiction is for mental illness. But it's also, frankly, lack of economic opportunity, lack of educational opportunity, pushing people into criminal behavior just because they've got to survive, got to look out for themselves. You can't, in a lot of ways you can't, I mean, you can blame them, but you can't blame them. We need more economic opportunity in Illinois, in Chicago, and in Rockford, and Decatur, and so many of our communities. That's what we're pushing for every day. We need more educational opportunity, better school funding, more equitable, just school funding, and we're fighting for that every day. These reforms are part of that. The folks who've suffered because we don't have enough jobs, we don't have good enough schools, we haven't dealt with mental health issues properly to help them, they need our help. They deserve our help to be a just and fair society. And that's what this bill does. It's an honor for me to sign it. I want to thank you again, the members of the General Assembly, for their leadership and the working together. And I hope this can be another step in our bipartisan efforts to make a better future for the people of Illinois with all sorts of reforms to get more jobs, to get our government working for the people in every regard, efficiently and effectively, to make sure that we properly fund our schools, and we change our system that's not necessarily serving everyone to help our government system serve every person in the state of Illinois. And that's what this is about today. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to step over one of my, well, thank you.
Mary got to sign this deal.
I told him since I've been waiting the longest.
All right, so this is.
Stop talking about those 30 years.
So this is the largest number of pens I've ever signed my name with, so this is a record. I can get it done, though. Yeah, but let's focus on questions on this very important topic of criminal justice reform. Yes?
This bill still requires prisoners to have either a birth certificate, to present a birth certificate or social security card to get a permanent ID. Why is it necessary to require people who are locked up by the state to prove who they are to the state?
Well, it's not proving it to the state. It's proving it to landlords. It's proving it to employers. It's proving it to banks and credit grantors. And so that ID is an important part of that process.
No, I'm sorry. Why couldn't you just give? Why couldn't the state just give them an ID?
Sometimes individuals will come into the criminal justice system under an assumed name. So we want to make sure that they are who they say they are before we issue them an ID.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.
Next, from Chicago, we sit down with Greg Goins, the superintendent of the West Frankfort School District, and discuss how students' cell phones can benefit their education, as well as how the rush of new technology is changing the classroom.
Greg Goins, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. We are here at the Illinois Association of School Boards Conference, and one of the issues that we often hear people talk about is how students love their cell phones. Sometimes teachers don't want them to have them in the schools. Some people say it's okay. Where do you come down on that issue?
Well, I think there's two rules of thought. That, there's one, on the one hand, there are folks out there that believe that cell phones are a distraction and really detract from the learning process. I happen to fall on the other side. I think it's a marvelous learning tool, and we have a new generation of kids in our classrooms and schools today, the new I generation, and this is the world that we live in. And I would rather teach those kids how to use those devices in a reasonable and responsible way than to take them away from them, because I think there's so many wonderful learning opportunities with mobile devices.
What are some of those? I mean, people think, well, they're going to be texting their friends during classes and all. What are the ways in which the cell phone adds to the educational environment?
Well, I think it's just a wealth of information. I mean, if you think about it, a smartphone's nothing more than a pocket computer. And the average school district in this country spends $400 per student annually on technology. So you're spending a lot of money creating these traditional computer lab environments when kids already have these devices at home. So why not let them bring them, their devices that they're already familiar with and comfortable with, let them bring them into the school and create that bring your own device environment, and let kids just enjoy those learning opportunities. There's so many opportunities kids can learn and grow with digital technology.
I think a lot of us who grew up in the 60s, we project our experiences the same as today. How has the classroom changed with this rush of technology we've had over the last 10 years?
Well, I tell people all the time, if classrooms look anything like they did when I was in school during the 1970s and early 80s, then we're failing our kids. I mean, we have to create a world that's relevant for them. And the 4 C's of education in the 21st century have to be front and foremost whenever we're thinking about our curriculum. We're talking about creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking skills. So, kids have these tools, and they're just wonderful opportunities for kids to learn and grow in a digital climate.
Some years ago, you're from Southern Illinois. Your district is what?
The West Frankfort School District in Southern Illinois.
And what is give us an idea, what is the population of your students? I mean, what is socioeconomically, how are
we have about 1,700 students in our school district, K through 12. It's a low poverty district, a lot of low income families, but we've been able to really bridge that digital divide with our Bring Your Own Device program. So kids that have devices, we allow them to bring them in the schools, and we teach them how to use them in a responsible way. So
what do you do for those families that can't have a device?
Well, we provide devices when we need to. We still spend district funds on things like iPads and those type of things. We're actually a one-to-one iPad school, K through 6, and then a BYOD school at the junior high and high school. So we do provide those opportunities.
How long have you had this policy?
BYOD's been in place for about 5 years, and it's continued to grow and flourish. And we have kids that are doing amazing things every day. And I tell people, if we just get out of their way, us adults, kids will find a way to use those tools in a positive way.
How have the teachers responded to having these devices?
I think initially it was challenging, but I think over a period of time, adults are like students. They want to use those digital tools as well. So I think over a period of time, everyone has accepted the idea that it has to be a part of our school culture.
So many people who might be in Chicago and have students here, there's so much rich culture, and the museums, et cetera, goes on and on and on, what they can go to. I had someone down in Massac County several years ago tell me that they have kids in high school who have never left the county. And to that end, I would imagine, the ability now for them to see the world through these devices really shows them what a big world there is out there, even if they don't have the wherewithal to be traveling the world.
Yeah, without a doubt. The world's a much smaller place today with the technology tools we have at our disposal. And, kids we can go to those museums. We can go to those Civil War battlefields. We'll take a virtual field trip and go anywhere we want. And we even have students that are connecting with other classrooms throughout the country through things like Mystery Skype. So just being able to connect with people and talk to them any place, any time has been a game changer for us.
All right, well, Greg Goins, we appreciate you taking time to speak with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tony Pulowski, Executive Director for the Arc of Illinois. We fight for the rights and needs for 220,000 infants, children, and adults with intellectual and other developmental disabilities and their families. With a bit of support, people with developmental disabilities can live a full life in the community. This is accomplished in a variety of ways, such as being included in their neighborhood schools alongside their non-disabled friends, being supported to live in their own homes instead of being locked away in institutions. Diversity makes our community better. And the good news, doing the right thing, investing in community supports, also saves taxpayers money. In fact, it costs taxpayers about half as much to support people with disabilities in community homes where they're better cared for than it costs to have them housed in institutions. Advancing positive public policy by supporting the development of community services best serves the needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is our greatest goal, developing inclusive communities so everyone can live a full life in the community. That's why I'm so proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. At its core, politics is about people and their needs, and the Illinois Channel's coverage of our issues allow us to tell the story of people with disabilities and their families, not in a quick soundbite, but in full unedited interview in which our parents can tell their story, what they want for their child with a disability, and why they were concerned about what the state was doing. Isn't that the kind of coverage we all want of politics? Coverage that ties us to the issues that really matter and in a way that doesn't shortchange the ability of those impacted to get their message out. I'm Tony Pulowski, Executive Director of the Arc of Illinois and a proud member of the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter the most.
Next, from Chicago, we attend a panel at the annual meeting of the Illinois Association of School Boards as State Senators Andy Manar and Dan McConchie and State Representative Will Davis discuss the ongoing push to reform the state's school funding formula. This runs about 50 minutes.
All right, good afternoon. I don't think I've missed a panel at this conference since I've been elected to the Senate, but let me begin by thanking everybody for the work that you do in your respective school districts. It's work that doesn't get enough credit. It's work that comes with a lot of headaches. I've never run for school board. I think I've run for every other office locally, but never for school board. So I want to begin there by thanking you for the work that you do on the local level. To my colleagues here to my right, Representative Davis, who I've gotten to know well since I was elected to the Senate because of his work previous to my arrival on this important issue. He schooled me a lot through this whole process. Well, I appreciate that. And to Senator McConchie, who joined us in the Senate not too long ago, served with him on the commission that the governor formed, and we've been bringing him along with us too, and we're going to get you around the state as well, Senator, to see districts like I represent. Here's what I thought I'd talk about today, just for a few minutes. I thought I'd give you my perspective on the success of the School Funding Reform Commission that the governor appointed, as you know, many months ago. Offer my viewpoint of some of the things that we've gone through, and then offer my suggestions to the commission, which I've given, and to each of you and your respective roles in the education community in the state on what the commission should concentrate on the few meetings that we have left. So we've met every other week now for several weeks. Our charge, as you probably know, is to produce a bill by February 1st of 2017, which I believe we will. I believe the commission will produce a bill and will work toward a bipartisan agreement. Whether or not that happens at the end, of course, is subject to so many things between where we are and that point in time. But I do believe that the commission will produce a piece of legislation because of the work that's been done in a bipartisan way. I think there's broad agreement on a couple of points. And if you look back in the mirror to years ago, I think this shows that we've had progress on this difficult issue. The first is this. I think there's broad agreement that our system and our distribution model that's in the formula today needs to change. There's still a few that say that what we have works. The model that's a couple decades old, that hasn't changed much even though the state has changed, still works in a very good fashion, but I think those voices are few and far between today in the state. And I also think that there's broad agreement that absent of change, our system's going to continue to erode, and the cost to fix it, which would lead to better outcomes, is only going to grow. So that's progress that I think that both Republicans and Democrats have worked toward, so that we can be at the point where we are today when it comes to the need for change in the system. Number two, this is a little bit more detailed, but I think it's very important. Just a couple of years ago, there were just a few proposals that had been filed and committed to legislation. That was an effort that I took part in. It followed efforts over many years in the legislature attempting to change our distribution model. But today we have any number of proposals that have been committed to legislation and that are filed for public display and public scrutiny in front of the legislature and the people of the state. That too is a point of progress. Here's one thing that each of those proposals have in common, which I think leads me to the point that there is broad agreement on this, that we should establish a defined adequacy target for every individual school district in the state based on the needs of the students that district serves. So whether it's an approach that I've taken in Senate Bill 231 or previous versions of that, or whether it's the evidence-based model, which has been promoted and well-researched by the Management Alliance and others, sponsored by Representative Davis in the House, and Senator Lightford and Barrickman in the Senate. There's one thing that all of these bills have in common, and it's simply we should measure what is adequate for each unique school district in Illinois, and we should strive toward that goal for each district. Now, if we could just do that, if we could just change that, we would be so far ahead of where we are today in the state. So those are two things where I think there's some general agreement. Number one, we need to change the system, and number two, we should put a defined adequacy target for each district in our distribution model so that we can attend to the specific needs of every school district. Moving on to where I think the commission ought to concentrate its work from here on out with the limited meetings that we have left, I've identified 5 things, and I'll just tick through these things real quick. Number one, I think we need to focus our conversations on equity, understanding that there's all kinds of things that go along with that conversation, but we should stick to the core purpose of the commission as outlined by the governor, which is how do we achieve greater equity among public school districts in the state, and correspondingly, what happens if the model that we produce or suggest as a commission isn't fully funded? Does that still lead to a more equitable system or not? So that's one thing that I think we should continue to focus on, and we have, but I think we should stick in a disciplined way to that topic. Number two, we should have, and this is a tough one, but we should have the conversation about what do we do with current resources that are in the budget today. Despite the fact that we have incredible challenges that are going to be in front of us for years to come in the state, we have resources in the billions, of course, in the state budget. Should we utilize those resources to address inequity? Should we freeze those resources and distribute them as they're distributed today and add to? That's a question that the commission has yet to grapple, and I think we have to have that conversation in front of the commission in a public setting, have that debate. That will help lead us to a final piece of legislation. Number three, which I think is vitally important, the commission should focus its work on transitioning to a new system. So how long should that transition take, and how much is it going to cost? Those are two difficult questions that legislators on both sides of the aisle have tried to tackle in recent years with different pieces of legislation to reform school funding, but the commission hasn't gotten there yet, and I think we should spend a good amount of time on those two things. How long should the transition take, and what type of resources are we going to devote to it? Number 4 and 5 have come to me I look out in the room, and I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but these things have come to me from some individuals in this room and from administrators across the state and their legislators that have come to me over time. That people have said in public settings or in public meetings on school funding, hey, Menard, you ought to think about this, and you guys down in Springfield ought to think about these two things. The first is what I define as a middle district. So districts that have seen their fair share of increase in at-risk students, or students that we call poverty students, and they may not be at the state average, they might be just below, but what they're experiencing on the ground is a dramatic increase. So we want to make sure that we don't discount those challenges in a funding formula proposal. So that's something that the Commission has started to talk about, and we have some unfinished work to do with that. And then finally, the fifth thing that I think we ought to spend our remaining time on is the issue of property taxes. That's something that Senate Bill 231 doesn't address directly. That's something that the evidence-based model over time, I think, addresses, but not immediately. But there's two pieces of that I think are important. Number one, and this has come from legislators in the state Senate who have advocated for this during our debate, and I think they're exactly right. We have a group of districts that have both high rates and high values, and that's a nasty combo for homeowners. And we want to make sure that any changes that we make don't adversely affect that type of district that would force them to raise their rates higher. That's a bad idea. So we have to address that in our bill, and I think the best way to address it is to make sure that we don't do anything that makes that bad situation worse. And then second, on the flip side, this has come to me from legislators as well, that we have a lot of districts that tax at a very low rate but spend well over what's adequate for their students. And those, I don't like to use the word overfunded district, but that's the term that we've used in conversations in public. So we want to make sure that in a time of strained resources, especially on the state level, when you add those to local contributions, that we have a balance in all of those things. I think that will help us get to a better place with a potential bipartisan piece of legislation. So again, I think there's broad agreement on a couple of points. We got to change the system. We have to set a defined adequacy target for each school district. And then I think we ought to continue to work on those 5 things that I just outlined. And I would just close with saying this. I was a skeptic of this commission when it was created. I was a skeptic of the commission. I thought it was too big. I thought it was too broad. But I will say this. Each legislative leader made their appointments almost immediately, if you recall. That was a good sign to me, that people were serious about this conversation. And then number 2, I would give some pretty high marks to Dr. Beth Purvis for keeping us in line and focused on the effort and the task that we were given as a bipartisan group of legislators. And I think because of the work of the members of the commission as well as the work of the administration, we haven't turned over a whole lot of new turf, but we certainly have covered important turf that I believe will allow us to be in a position to have a bill filed and ready to go before February 1st. So again, thank you for the invitation, Susan. Appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So next we are going to hear from State Senator Dan McConkey. He's a Republican from the 26th Senate District. Senator McConkey is one of the newest members of the Senate, being sworn in April. But he has been actively participating in the Illinois School Funding Reform Commission created by Governor Rauner this summer. Please join me in welcoming Senator McConkey.
Well, thank you very much for coming out and joining this panel today. Thank you to Senator Menard for the kind words and the introduction that he gave. I just want to commend Senator Menard for his hard work that he has done over the past months and years, actually, to address this real problem that we have in the state. Some issues that we have, as you well know, that we have kids across the state that suffer from a subpar education because they live on the wrong side of a certain boundary line. Their zip code is one that has very low property wealth, and so there's not able to be the resources necessary in order to educate those children. My district is in the northwest suburbs, and in most of my area, we do not have that problem. We have very high property wealth and are subsequently able to fund the vast majority of our school districts at a very high level. But I fully recognize that we suffer as a state when any child gets into a circumstance in which they fall behind as they're trying to go through the schooling process, miss out on opportunities that then close doors for them to be able to become productive citizens down the road. And so I'm very proud to be on the commission and was fortunate to have be appointed. Being somewhat new to school funding issues, I have learned a lot over the last few weeks and months. And I think Senator Menard gave a great overview in regards to where we're at. A couple of things that have really stood out to me is I think that we are, it looks like there's going to be probably some pretty broad consensus on identifying what is adequacy, this issue that Senator Menard brought up, and being able to do so in a way that I think we're going to be able to look and know within a relatively close dollar amount, is a school being well funded or not? Are these students that are in these particular districts at least have the appropriate resources necessary to get that education that they need? And then certainly we're going to be able to look at that across school districts and then be able to determine, is there the appropriate equity that we're going to see across the state. A few things that I want to bring up that I think is important for us to address, and I hear it from my school board members and administrators, that I think we are going to be addressing coming up here in the next few weeks. One of which has to do with mandate relief. There are, obviously a large number of mandates that are unfunded mandates handed down by the state that you have to comply with, that you get no funding for, at least from the state, and may not really contribute to your doing what you need to do in order to help kids get to where they need to be. There has been some very little initial discussion as to how we measure the success of particular school districts, how well they're educating students, and for those districts that are above the bar, that there be no mandates per se, or a very small number of mandates. And if there are a small number of mandates, what is it that we kind of agree as a state are absolutely necessary to be there? Another, I think, has to do with, are there going to be incentives for consolidation of school districts? Certainly there is, I have both K-8 and high school districts and consolidated districts in my area. And some of them took certain incentives that were in the system 30 years ago to consolidate, and others did not. And I think there's going to be a discussion going forward is there areas in which consolidation makes sense? And if so, what kind of incentives can the state provide in order to assist with that process? Because certainly, as we well know, and as you well know, there's a lot of desire for local control in our state, and having smaller school districts in a lot of ways feeds people's desire to have that local control. And so what would consolidation look like? What kind of incentives would be there? And how can we maintain both the reality as well as the feeling of local control amongst the citizens in that area, so they feel that if there's an issue or a problem, they can be sure that they are heard. I want to also dovetail on Senator Menard's discussion about property taxes and expand on it just a little bit. We can essentially take the property tax areas of our state and put them in one of four quadrants. You have high tax, high yield districts. You have high tax, low yield districts, low tax, high yield, and low tax, low yield. And we're looking at numbers right now to try to identify school districts and where do they fit. So, for example, just outside of my district is Zion, Illinois, which has, I think, the third or fourth highest property taxes in the entire state. I think it's about 19.73%. In that area, you have very low property tax wealth, very high tax rates, low yields on those tax rates, and this is an area that creates what I call kind of an economic dead zone. So businesses are not going to go and set up in that area, right? If you're wanting to set up a small scale manufacturing facility, and you're not going to go and set up in Zion, you're going to go across the border in Wisconsin, you're going to go in other places in the state, East St. Louis, Lansing, Illinois, same types of problems. We have these pockets of high tax, low yield areas that we fundamentally have to address how do we get the appropriate resources into education in those areas, and then be able to address the property tax rates so that the property tax does not serve as a barrier to economic development, which is vitally important for our communities as well. So this is a discussion I think that we're going to be looking at going forward. I personally am a proponent of shifting away, fundamentally away from property tax as a primary source of education for schools. That raises a lot of concerns and questions on behalf of both school districts as well as local parents. For example, a lot of the questions that come up are, how are we going to maintain local control? How do we know that the state has not historically been a good partner with you in regards to proration and things like that? So how can we ensure that there's going to be adequate funding for the schools? And so that it's a very difficult issue. And I think that it's something, I appreciate Senator Menar's optimism that we're going to be able to get something by February 1st. I'm hopeful that we can get there. I at the same time will be sitting here and saying, I think we want to do this well. And whether that it entails a multi-step process, I think we're going to have to address this issue of property taxes, not just for school districts, but for the economic well-being of our state as a whole. So I look forward to your questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Finally, we are going to hear from State Representative Will Davis. He's a Democrat from the 30th House District. Representative Davis has served in the House since 2003 and is the chairman of the House Elementary and Secondary Education Appropriations Committee. Please join me in welcoming Representative Davis.
Thank you very much, and let me add to that I'm also a very proud father of that little 5-year-old. So, and it's kind of self-serving, but when I do what I do, particularly on behalf of education, that's what I think about right there, because at some point in the very near future, she will be entering the education system that I'm trying to create and lead for her. And I certainly want to make sure that what I have in my district in the south suburbs certainly gives her what she needs to be successful moving forward. I am pleased and honored to be here today with my colleagues from the Senate. Again, I'm Will Davis. I'm representative of the 30th District, which is completely housed in the south suburbs. And as I sat and I listened to both of the senators talk, I thought about kind of where I fit in this continuum, where Senator McConkey has kind of, he talked about, wealthier communities, if you will, in his area. Senator Menar is downstate, which has probably some mixture of low, not high income necessarily, but medium income, middle class families. My district in the south suburbs kind of is a mixture of some of both, where I have communities like Robbins, Illinois, which is deemed to be one of the poorest communities in the state of Illinois. I've got communities like Harvey, Illinois, which has some of the highest tax rates that exist in the state of Illinois. But I also have communities like Homewood, which is a medium to high income community, very, very nice community, great schools, and Flossmoor, again, high income communities as well. So I kind of have a mixture, I think, of some of both that exists in the state of Illinois. So to some degree, I think, however, what we're talking about fares in districts like mine, so goes the rest of the state to some degree. I am proud to be a part of the Education Funding Commission, serving as the Appropriations Chair in the House. Certainly was natural that I be a part of it, but what's been really great about it is that it's really given us an opportunity to kind of take a couple of steps back. Even before I got to the General Assembly 14 years ago, there were always these conversations about education funding reform, making sure that the state upholds its burden, if you will, in terms of resources to local districts. And there's always been a conversation about local control and what that meant in relation to the state. There's always been conversations about trying to figure out how to change it. We've evolved a lot since then to have a dialogue about what we call evidence-based funding, which is really looking at data as a way to help drive some of the decisions relative to how the dollars are spent. And I think Senator Menar touched on one of the most important pieces of this evidence-based funding piece is that it really takes a good look at what your district needs and then tries to figure out how to send resources based on what your district needs. So again, one of the things that I talk about in this broad conversation is poverty and what that really means. Because I believe that poverty in my district is different than poverty in some other parts of the state. For several years before I was elected, I worked for Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. And one of the things that he always talked about was that in the south suburbs, we would have I don't quite know where he got his data from, but he said 1 job for every 60 people. Whereas in the northwest suburbs, western suburbs, there were 60 jobs for every 1 person. So that meant that my community, if they wanted to have success, wanted to be able to sustain their families, they had to move. They had to travel to other areas. They had to go to other places. So for me, data is important. And when we talk about evidence-based funding, we're essentially saying that there is data points, and information that should drive ultimately this conversation about how those dollars ultimately are decided upon, determining what adequate and equitable means, and then ultimately what that should be moving forward. So when I think about the commission, for me, the commission has brought about some very necessary conversations that we kind of dance around a lot, and through the legislative process we may try to address it here this year, and the next year we may try to address something different, or if we messed it up the first year, we come back the next year and try to fix it, and we dance around a lot. But it has really brought a lot of conversations together, again, that need substantial dialogue. For instance, Senator McConkey talked about mandates. There's always a conversation about mandates, unfunded mandates, what that means. I would argue that members of the legislature are reactionary. So often some of the mandates that you see coming towards you are because one of your constituents, and there are constituents too, has come and complained and said, my district this, or they didn't do this, or they wouldn't address this. So they come to us, and we are reactionary. So we respond, and again, sometimes that response then ultimately results in something that the local districts don't like. Another conversation that I think has come out in this, and this was one of the meetings we just had in the last couple of weeks, is that on special ed. And I never knew that special ed had so many different components and pieces, and the fact that they don't all get along, to be quite honest with you. So it's interesting, but I respect the fact that educating kids who have special needs certainly is one of the true things that we do in those districts. I mean, they are the neediest children, if you will, and it's important to really try to figure out what those needs are. And I'm pleased to see Dr. Leanne Frost, who runs the ECHO co-op that's in my district as well, joining us today, and she's been a part of that conversation about what special ed means and how we ultimately figure that piece out. And again, like I've mentioned before, another part of the conversation, again, one of the conversations we recently had in the commission was that on poverty, and exactly what does that mean. And it's interesting because, again, when I talk about poverty, I had a member of the commission who's James Demas, who's the secretary of the Department of Human Services for the state, who says, I grew up a poor kid in Wheaton. Now, the Wheaton that I know, and we had this conversation, and we had to understand what that meant. But going back to what I said about Congressman Jackson, is poverty in Wheaton, kind of something that is there because that's what people want? And not to say that people want to be poor, but again, his poverty in Wheaton, to me, is different than my poverty in the south suburbs, where I don't have the opportunity to address that need of poverty, whereas in some communities that have poverty, have opportunities very locally where people can address those needs. So again, it's brought out some really, really interesting conversations. It's been enlightening even for me, and I thought maybe over my 14 years I've actually heard it all through the committee process. But no, this has been very interesting. I too am very optimistic as to where this is headed. Now, I don't want to cast aspersions on ultimately where we're going with this, but again, just looking at kind of how the politics of where we are has happened over the last several months, I do believe, like Senator Menard said, that we will get to a piece of legislation that I think many of us, if not all of us on the commission, will ultimately agree on, because that's our job. That's what we've been asked to do. That's what we were appointed to do being on this commission, is come up with something that we all can agree on. And then, of course, now it's the tough sell. The governor has to be supportive of it. Mike Madigan, James Cullivan, Jim Durkin, Christine Redonio, they all have to now be able to wrap their mind around this and then see where we go from there. And I think that's where we're going to have the trouble, is at that level. Because, again, just being honest with all of you in the room, that's where we have seen some of the challenges. It's not necessarily amongst us as members. It's about what happens when we turn things over to our leadership and how they work together, or for that matter, don't work together to try to get something done. So that's where the real challenge is going to be. And as I sit down, what I would of course say is that one of the key components of anything that we do in Springfield is what you do as constituents, and how you not necessarily embrace it, but how you advocate moving forward. And I truly believe that advocacy is so very important in this, regardless of which side of the fence you're on, which side of the aisle you're on. You know, if in this conversation, at this conference, and in this room, we can agree that the most important thing that we need to be addressing are the needs of our children, then let's figure out how to keep that at the very top of the list. Regardless of who you voted for, regardless of what ideology you may lean toward, or whatever the case may be, let's just really keep kids at the top of that list. And I truly believe that if we can figure out how to make sure that we keep our young people, our children at the top of that list, then we will truly get something done, because all of you will demand it, all of you will drive us to make sure that it happens. And the more we get from you, the more we can push our leadership ultimately to get something done. Thank you very much.
I think John approved of my remarks.
Well, I appreciate Representative Davis saying that, because one thing we as lobbyists always try to impress upon you all is how extremely important it is to connect with your legislators. Make sure that you are talking to them in the good times and not just the bad, and make sure you are showing them the wonderful things you're doing in their districts, because we as lobbyists can always go talk to the legislators, but when it comes from you, it's so much more impactful. So please always keep that in mind. So now we'd like to move into our question and answer time. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone. And this is a time for questions only, please. If you have an opinion you'd like to share, that's best saved for after the panel. So please go ahead and make your way to the microphone. And just determine whenever you're ready to talk. Ma'am, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is around, you mentioned it's unclear exactly if, you know, the way the current funding is going, if that would be frozen and then added on to, or if it would have to be a reallocation of what's already there. And so obviously, if it's more money being pumped into education in Illinois, I think there's only going to be so many people who are really going to be upset about that. And so if those neediest districts can get what they need, but if it ends up being a reallocation of the money that's already in the pot, you used a term that I found a little strange when you said a district that's overfunded, and if the state ends up taking money away from a district that you guys deem is overfunded, my question would be, and I don't mean this to sound snotty, but like, who are you to tell us that we're overfunded when as a community we've made a commitment to use that money to provide things for our children? And so while if there was more money and we could do this with more money, that's great, but the way the state's going, it doesn't seem like that's really going to happen. And so how do you reconcile having there be some losers in this plan?
We have losers every year, despite the fact we spent $1 billion more in the last 3 years. So our current model is redistribution every year of existing resources and over the past several years, new resources, but we still have the least equitable system in the country. So, you know, that's just a fact. So we have to grapple with that. You know, we had the first commission meeting, and we had a gentleman who, what was his name? Mike Griffin, Education Commission of the States, came to our first commission meeting. He led our discussions in the Senate almost 3 years ago. And the first chart that he put up to the commission was the exact same chart that he put up to the Senate 3 years ago. The only difference is we had spent $1.2 billion more along the way on schools, but we didn't move the equity needle at all. So the conversation we have to have is tough, as evidenced by your question, but what we can't have is a system that gobbles up additional resources, especially given the budget scenario that we have in the state today that doesn't get those resources to the districts that need them the most. That's the system we have today. So we have to balance those things out. And that was crystal clear to me when Mr. Griffiths showed up for our first commission hearing, used the same chart. Inequity by every measure was either the same or worse, and we had spent well over $1 billion more in the last 3 years. And the argument is not much of that got to the districts that are the least adequately funded in the state.
One thing I'll just note is that, to my knowledge, no state has done significant funding reform, school funding reform, without new money. That is, I think, probably the crux of our real problem. I mean, as we've looked at in other states. You know, when the commission first started, coming in from the outside, my view of things was there was really two initial proposals on the table. One was some form of redistribution, and the other was pump a whole, like, billions and billions more into the system to bring these very underfunded schools up to some level of adequacy. I think that as we've continued to explore this, there have been these issues like with property taxes and stuff that have outlined potential other maybe areas in the middle that might be a path forward to, but that's, I think, part of the hard work we have ahead.
Ma'am, let me just add, and I can appreciate what you said about who are we to tell you locally, but we all have to have a conversation about this. We ultimately do. Now, as an appropriations chair, I kind of think my job is to try to push as much state money out the door to local districts as possible. And if, you know, as we say, God bless you, if you can do more than what we're willing to give you, so be it. But understanding that because every community can't do more, we do have to take a look at how we raise the tide for the districts, if you will, for those districts that don't have resources like other districts. Now, if a district is able to spend, you know, below the adequacy level, if you will, as defined, the way it's currently defined, and get great results, great. You figured out how to do more with less. And we all need to be maybe taking a look at what you're doing. Maybe there's something that we can all adopt. But again, for me, I'm just looking at trying to see where we can add additional resources, but it can't be just, okay, let us do whatever we want to do without you saying anything about it, but yes, give us more state money. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Just to be clear, I'm not advocating at all that districts that don't need it would get more. Not at all. I totally understand that. Just the idea that some might actually have money taken away, that was the only point.
Well, and again, I think to what Senator Bernard said, I mean, we have losers all the time, and that's always been the problem with this conversation, because the moment a district says, I lose, and they tell that to their state rep or their state senator, then all bets are off. So again, it's just we have to figure out a different way to kind of get off that kind of conversation. Because again, I trust that if your job, even though you have a district to represent, a school district that's yours, I've just got to believe that at somewhere, everybody's prime objective is to see all children succeed. And if that means sharing some resources, I'd rather look at it that way than it becoming a winners and losers conversation. Because the moment it happens, then we get challenged in Springfield, because now and I don't necessarily want to make this a political discussion, but that's when we start looking at our next reelection. Okay, I made a decision that people aren't going to like. Am I going to get reelected again? And it shouldn't be about that. It really should be about just trying to keep young people at the top of the list and doing everything possible across the board to make sure that children receive what they need.
Hi, two things. Number one, if we could just get, well, we're supposed to get 100% funding this year. For a district that was devastated by the prorating, I mean, we're cut to minimums. If we at least knew we were going to get that guaranteed for a couple of years, I mean, not that we don't want more, but when it comes time to do your budget for next year, we're not guessing and going, well, should we lay off all the TAs again this year in case they decide to withhold something or whatever? We're trying to run our districts, and it'd be nice to have a little idea that this, you're going to at least get this much every year. Number two, for Mr. Davis especially, when you mentioned that about special ed, I don't know that legislators, because I've talked to several that don't understand that we have our budget set for this year, and we're going to be 500,000 in the hole. Luckily, we've got some working cash money left. If a family moves into our district, and God forbid they have children with all kinds of problems, and we got to send them to a special school in Springfield or St. Louis, we have to come up with that money that we don't have in the budget. So you got to find it somewhere. If there was a pool of money for special ed circumstances like that, I think that would help a lot of districts, the ones that don't have, extra money laying around, because we're responsible for educating those kids or housing them or whatever we have to do. But unless you've got some extra funds around, you're stuck.
Well, again, as I'm learning more and more, again, for children with special need, I think there are reimbursements in place. Now, maybe the reimbursement isn't where it needs to be, but again, that would imply that you're not footing the bill 100%, but maybe you are still footing some of that or most of that bill, but those are areas that we, again, are trying to figure out our way through that under this conversation. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but that's, again, one of the great things about this dialogue is that it's just bringing out a lot of conversations and really forcing us to kind of meet it head on about how we figure out how to address a myriad of those needs. Sam, certainly.
Please state your name and your district so our legislators have a little bit of an idea where you're from. I apologize, I should have said that before.
Yeah,
Go ahead, sir.
I was hoping I would get away without saying that.
Can't be anonymous here.
Quick statement first and then a question. My name is Mark Rising, Indian Prairie School District 204. The first, just a quick statement, thank you for the stopgap budget. It'd be nice if we could get our payment from last year, our last payment, and our first payment from this year. I'm just saying, because we're missing about $9 million. The question I have for you is, I respect Representative Senator Davis and Senator Menard and Senator McConchie talking about the adequacy part. It's good to hear that. It also is obvious that's going to take a while to get to the adequacy part, of course. Regarding the equity part, my district is the largest foundation district and took the biggest hit under Senate Bill 1 or Senate Bill 231 of about $10 million a year. We cannot afford that. Our district would essentially be hemorrhaging when we've had to make significant cuts, and we will receive 15% of our funding from the state. If a district is spending less than the state average and doing the best they can financially, I would like to see, especially if you can't get the adequacy part first, I would like to beg you to please have the hold harmless be permanent part of the bill, if they're meeting certain requirements, so we're not getting punished, especially spending lower than the state average. Because as a district in a collar county, we're losing teachers because we can't pay them that much money because we're getting less and less from the state. As far as districts getting less and less from the state, yes, that's based on attendance. And yes, districts should not be receiving the same, in my opinion, the same amount of money if they're losing 1,000 to 2,000 students per year. They should receive less money. Well, my question is, are you leaning, will you please guarantee that hold harmless as part of the bill in February?
So I mentioned that in my remarks about transition time and cost. Obviously, a hold harmless would be that's the cost, right? Is how quickly do you ramp up or ramp down? I guess depending on how you want to describe it. So that's the cost to any change in any system. What Senate Bill 231 accomplished when it passed the Senate were three backstops. Number one, no district would lose over a certain amount per student. I think it was $1,000. That was a very small number of, would benefit a very small number of districts in the state, some of the wealthiest. Number two, it was phased in over 4 years' time. And number three, it would say, to your point, any district that spends below their target adequacy level, not a state average, because that's not a good metric, because there's huge outliers. But any district that didn't spend to the adequacy target would be held harmless for, I believe it was 8 fiscal years. Until the full, there's going to be, I would never advocate for a full permanent hold harmless. I would never do that.
Well, and that's why I questioned you, because
Yeah.
it was an appropriation that had to be voted on every single year.
So
And
does-
to me, that's not something to support.
So does your categorical grants today. So does your bilingual education. So does general state aid. There's no continuing appropriation for anything. So every dollar that goes to public education in the state every fiscal year comes to a vote in both the House and the Senate. There's no guarantee for any of it. So what we tried to do in the bill was try to thread that needle of what's a good phase-in period with a reasonable cost attached, not for so much political purposes, but what makes sense. And I think to your last point, that makes incredible sense. If there's a school district that isn't spending an adequate level for the students that they serve, their unique adequacy target, then the state shouldn't do anything to prevent, or I guess to lower their state contribution. Now, put that up against the system we have today, where we have hundreds of school districts that are nowhere near their adequacy target. We've spent $1.3 billion more in the last 3 years, and those districts are spending less and less and less. They're getting further away from their adequacy target. And we've spent $1 billion more.
And I don't disagree with you.
Sir, actually, I want to get to some more questions, so do either of you, would you like to address them? Okay. Ma'am, go ahead.
My name is Sally Davis. I'm from Community District 115, which is Lake Forest. And I need to start by saying I would never have my 5-year-old who could hold still that long. You guys are doing, you are phenomenal. You are an awesome girl. We're sitting there. My kid would be off the walls. Okay, so one of the things I liked hearing from you guys was when you were talking about the myriad of other issues that have their tentacles that come into this, and that it's sort of this onion that you keep peeling back. I was surprised that Senator Menard, you did not mention pension funding reform as one of the ones that is also in the mix that needs to be addressed. So my real question for you, I think, is really going to Senator McConkey's point. No, I'm sorry. Representative Davis saying the legislation that comes, I am optimistic there will be legislation. My question is, without giving away where you're going, will it be comprehensive? Is the notion that it's just going to adopt whatever the determination of adequacy is, or is it really going to say, with respect to the bigger issues that you have touched on, which is where are we going to get the funding for this? What are we going to do about property taxes? What are we going to do about pension funding reform? What are we going to do about special ed? Are you envisioning at least proposing comprehensive legislation that would touch on what you think are the major factors that are going to affect education funding reform?
Well, I would probably have to say, again, that it would be difficult for it not to, because those are conversations that we're having right now, particularly on the pension side. You know, what is that going to look like? You know, we've heard some proposals out of the administration about a reformation of pensions, but we've heard Madigan say, "Fine, you guys take care of it." I mean, we've heard a number of things come out of leadership on that, but I would probably say, and that's just the diversity of the membership, meaning the legislature. So we've got some that are really focused on the pension conversation. So they're not going to let something like this roll out without it, touching or being a part of that. So it just depends on what member you're talking about in terms of something that's truly important to them, and that's on both sides of the aisle, in terms of how they see this, ultimately rolling out. So I guess what I'm saying is yes to your question, and that it would be tough not to talk about some of these other things in this context as well. Now, whether that means they're woven into the dialogue all through, or if we kind of get to somewhere on this one, and then, okay, now let's bring in that into the conversation and see how it changes. I'm not sure if we know exactly how we're going to do it, but I think it has to happen.
I'm very encouraged by that. Thanks.
I don't know that there will be like one bill, for example. What I do think is that issues like pensions, issues like property tax, some of these other factors that are much larger, but obviously, as you were indicating, interconnected with school funding reform. A lot of those conversations, I think, will be able to advance more intelligently and faster once we have an adequacy and equity target. So once we know, the school, this particular school district in East St. Louis is this much underfunded, or, based on whatever's in that. I think that very much helps to create a base through which to be able to have some of these other conversations, and much more intelligently, that expand outside the school funding question.
My name is Jim O'Connor, Oak Park, District 97, school board member. Thank you guys for coming out, and thank you for organizing this. I have two questions. One, why is it that we have a state funding system that takes local ability to pay, free and reduced lunch students, special ed, that only takes like less than half the funds take that into account? Why is it not that we have, why doesn't it take more of, take those things into account? Why don't more funds take that into account? And then my second question is, as a school board member at Oak Park, I do really struggle with trying to get more money behind the kids who need it the most. Any tips on that? Any thoughts on things that you can do at the state level that would help me as an advocate for the kids who really need help the most? How can we get them more money at the local level too? Thank you.
Well, if I could start at the end and come forward, I mean, one of the things that I observe at school board meetings is that they're very poorly attended, and it's usually the more vocal people that come. So if you're talking about children in your district whose voice isn't heard as much in that conversation just based on who attends the meetings, it really is going to require that push from that segment of the community. Because I think if you have the desire to want to do that, then I think it's 6 other people you got to convince. And the question is, can you convince those 6 other people to agree with you relative to pushing more of your local resource in a different, in a different direction? And I'd be careful in me saying something to you, because then that gets into me telling you what to do, so to speak. You know what I mean? And other members of your board. So I just really believe, that it's your community that really has to stand up for them, and certainly you can be a catalyst for that change in terms of mobilizing other parts of your community to do so. And I lost the first part of your question. What was that again? Oh, you said in other funds. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So why is it that only just less than half the state funds take local ability to pay, free and reduced lunch students, special ed status into account? Why is it not higher than that?
Well, if you're talking about that being just part of the education conversation, well, there's the Department of Human Services side, where a lot of that data is derived that we use on the education side. So I think it does, those categories do permeate more of the discussion in the state, at the state level, than just on the education spending, if I think I'm answering what you're talking about. And it depends on what that member is interested in. One of the things that I push a lot is supplier diversity. We have a number of entities in the state of Illinois that we regulate, and I'm pushing them to do more in terms of diversifying their workforce, recognizing that they need to do more in communities that don't have as much, and there's legislation that I've passed in order to try to drive that conversation. So I think it permeates a lot more of the dialogue and other conversations in the state than probably many of us may realize. So it's not just in the education conversation that we talk about free and reduced lunch and poverty counts and things of that nature. There are in other areas.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Don Schaefer, Executive Vice President of Midwest Truckers Association. We represent over 2,700 member companies in 15 states who operate in Illinois. These men and women are responsible for keeping the food in your store, the fuel at your gas station, and bringing the books to your schools. In fact, look around the house and virtually everything you see will have been moved at one time or another by a truck. That's why our issues are your issues. Whether it's the taxes they pay, the price of fuel, or the regulations truckers must endure, in the end, you, the consumer, pay the price. That's one reason why I'm proud to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. Just as truckers deliver the goods on our nation's highways, the Illinois Channel delivers the information you need on your information highway. The Illinois Channel reaches 1.4 million cable homes across the state, as well as making their programming available as a video stream on their website at illinoischannel.org. Delivering the goods is Midwest Truckers' business. Delivering the information you need to stay connected to the actions of state government, that's the Illinois Channel's business. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.